Okay, let's get to Jeff Paterson. He's down at Rogers Arena, and today a presentation of the Arnold Palmer designed Whistler Golf Club, off to an incredible start here in the 2024 season. Amazing reviews on the course condition and service. We're reminding group organizers of 12 or more here. It is not too early to start booking those September and October buddy or corporate trips. The prime times are filling up faster at the Whistler Golf Club. Of course, you bring a group of 12 or more, you, the organizer, plays for free. Tell us about your group at whistlergolf.com/groups. Patrick Alvine, Canucks General Manager, will be speaking here in about 25 minutes or so. So we're going to talk to J-Pat and get him out to make sure he can get down there and question the Canucks General Manager after a very busy day. We got Jeff ready, Grady?
We do.
Okay, let's bring him in. Our Canucks reporter, of course, the host of Rink Wide Vancouver. Hi, Jeff.
Hi. Welcome to the land of still burgundy seats here at Rogers Arena.
A
little surprised at that as I walked in. It is July 1st. They'll be playing games here in September, preseason games at the very least. No ice down, but this is a day that's all about stick handling. And for the Vancouver Canucks, I think for the most part, they have addressed some areas of need without locking themselves into unmanageable contracts. Some may wonder about going full term with Jake DeBrusk, but as Blake's talked about, one of the younger members of this free agent crop and a guy that's a 3-time 25-plus goal scorer. They needed goal scorers, and guess what? Goal scorers in the National Hockey League get paid. So I can live with 5.5 if he can return somewhere between 25 and 30 goals more often than not over the balance of this contract.
Was that your favorite contract of the ones they've signed today, Jeff? I mean, he's by far the best player of the group that they've brought in, but contract-wise, which one did you prefer?
I will say that I like the addition of Kiefer Sherwood. And, I'm not expecting massive counting stats from this guy, but he was the 15th player in the National Hockey League in terms of hits last season, and he didn't play all 82 games. So they now have Dakota Joshua, who was top 10, and they add Kiefer Sherwood. And I have to say, guys, having been there in Nashville and watching the games here against the Predators in that opening round, my eye was drawn to just how hard he played. He was an absolute thorn in the side of the Vancouver Canucks, to the point that the Preds were prepared to put their fourth line out against top lines for the Vancouver Canucks and let those guys go at it and try and take a strip off some of the Canucks top players. Kiefer Sherwood did not miss an opportunity to finish a check. Ask Quinn Hughes about that. So this is a guy, the motor is always running. And when you think that Sam Lafferty somehow got 2 years by $2 million in Buffalo, this is a replacement who I think is I'm going to say more effective, certainly more physical than Lafferty ever was as a member of the Vancouver Canucks. And I like that signing. So, he's a role player and he knows his role, but I think under Rick Tocchet, Tocchet's going to have a ton of time for a player like Kiefer Sherwood.
Back to DeBrusk, he's never averaged over 17 minutes of ice time with the Bruins, and yet he plays on the PK, got a couple of shorthanded goals last year. In fact, plays on a power play, had 10 power play points last year for the Boston Bruins. There's room to get these counting stat totals higher if he's playing 18 minutes a game here for the Canucks, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And he talked about how excited he was to get that opportunity. That was one of the things that sold him on Vancouver. But I thought, really some self-awareness as well when he was asked about areas that can improve. And he basically said everywhere he wants to get better. He still thinks that he's got more to offer in a lot of areas of the game. But if he is getting the opportunity to play higher in the lineup, and certainly it looks like he would be penciled in alongside Elias Pettersson, and I've said this to you guys, I've said this elsewhere, no matter what the Canucks do here on July 1st, the most important thing for them this offseason is to get star-level Elias Pettersson back into the mix. So that's sort of out of their control here on July 1st. But if they get anything close to the player that they've had for most of his time in the National Hockey League, then it does become a really enticing opportunity for a player like Jake DeBrusk to play with a playmaker, a guy that has the vision that Elias Pettersson does. And, ultimately it's up to the coaching staff, and that's what the rest of the offseason and training camp is for, to come up with lines. But it would seem like DeBrusk, Höglander, and Pettersson could very well be a line for the Vancouver Canucks. And so for Jake DeBrusk, that sounds like opportunity is knocking. And let's see what he does with it. But again, he's being put in a position to succeed, and he's already had some success throughout his career, as you would expect. I mean, he was a mid-teen first-round pick, so there were high expectations on him coming out of junior hockey. I think at times he's lived up to that, but again, I think he's got more to give, and the Canucks are certainly banking on that as well.
So, Jeff, let's take on the criticism, because there are some now in Canucks circles that are basically saying they failed to get an elite winger, that for all the talk of raising the bar, that meant going out, putting your money where your mouth is, and taking the big swings at the biggest names available. They were kind of 1.5 feet in at the deadline. They made the moves for Zadorov and Lindholm, and then demurred when the price on Gensel got too high. You'll remember Alvin coming out and saying, hey, we've already traded some prospects here. We didn't want to totally bankrupt the kitty going forward. I'm looking at a tweet here. Talk at Staples. Step back for sure. Myers playing second pair is bad. We'll struggle to score. Demko better stay healthy. Many people said to me on Twitter over the weekend, hey, Canucks could have traded for Gensel's rights, right? Canucks could have traded for Taneff's rights if you absolutely wanted Chris Taneff. Take that on, that they aren't quite fully committed to being all in here and failed to add the elite talent that would get them to the next level and raise this bar.
Yeah, as I sit here 3 hours into free agency and talk to you guys, they're not a better team than they were when the season ended in Game 7 against the Edmonton Oilers. Nikita Zadorov had a huge playoffs. Elias Lindholm was a real contributor in the playoffs. Jake DeBrusk comes in. He adds a necessary element. They needed more goals. We saw that. They scored 3 goals in the final 2 games of the season against that series against the Edmonton Oilers. They need goal-scoring help. I would have liked to have seen them add another goal scorer here in free agency. And you can say, hey, they're not done, but they are running out of cap space. And I get that they, signed a player like Pius Suter early in August. And we'll see. There will still be some players that shake loose. There are other ways to address that. But in the here and now, I don't think that they're as good today as they were at the end of the season. They don't play games in July and August. So this is a management group that I think recognizes that. I look at their depth chart, and I just talked about the potential of a Pettersson, Höglander, DeBrusk line. Then if Miller and Besser stay together, I'm not a huge proponent of Pius Suter playing in the top 6, but if it's not him, Danton Heinen wasn't brought in here to be a top 6 winger for the Vancouver Canucks. So I'm kind of curious ultimately where he is going to slot in, because I just think with Lindholm gone, you look at Suter probably as the third line center. I've seen some people say, hey, run it back with Bluger between Garland and Joshua. I just think Pius Suter is a better offensive player. I think he thinks the game offensively better than Teddy Bluger does. I think he's got better offensive chops. I would be far more inclined to give Pius Suter an opportunity there and see if he can't rev up both Dakota Joshua and Connor Garland, because you remember the slow starts that like a lot of guys had heated starts last year to the season. Joshua and Garland weren't 2 of them. And so you'd like to, give them an opportunity to succeed, play them with a center that has some offensive bent. And I think that of the 2, I get Bluger had a nice run with those guys, but I just think over the long haul, Pius Suter is probably a better option there. But there are still some holes. And, we haven't even talked about the defense. Look, Forbort's I think a decent replacement for a guy like Ian Cole, but there's no replacement for Nikita Zadorov. And so if you're trying to go a little bit cheaper on the back end and you go Forbort, and if it's Noah Juleson time, look, beyond Quinn Hughes and Philip Hronik, there is absolutely no puck moving among the remaining 4 defensemen. And that is a bit of an issue and a concern for me. That's why I think when I look at the limited cap resources that they have, as much as I'd like them to add another scorer, I think it's imperative that they find one more NHL ready, one more defenseman that has NHL games on his resume. We're not talking about a prospect. We're not talking about a hope bet here. I think before the season starts, they're looking to add one more bona fide National Hockey League defense.
By the way, I'm 100% with you, Jeff. Frankly, you could argue that a secondary puck mover was something that was lacking off last year's team too. It was Quinn Hughes and the trees, right, that they surrounded him with. I did wonder whether they'd be involved on guys like Gustafsson, Brandstrom, like that level of puck moving third pair guy today. Thus far, they haven't. I do wonder whether they were a little bit sticker shocked by the price of some of these defensemen and what they got, because there were some contracts on defense today that Blake Grady and I looked at each other and went, what are you? I mean,
Joel
Edmondson getting 4 years.
Smaller
From
puck
the
moving defensemen, though, can probably be acquired on the trade market because I think their usability is being questioned now as we see the league get that much bigger. And in terms of looking at last year's group and this year's group, Jeff, too, Jake DeBrusk and Elias Lindholm had the same season offensively in a different position. Granted, one a center, one a wing. But in terms of the ability of the Vancouver Canucks just to replace offense, DeBrusk and Lindholm had the exact same seasons almost, both offensively in the regular season and in the playoffs. 10 points for Lindholm, 11 points for DeBrusk in 13 games each in the playoffs. So they didn't lose anything there. Counting stats wise, they're just going to have to figure out what to do with that third line center role, as you talked about with Pius Suter. But, and I think there's every bit the expectation that playing with Elias Pettersson, DeBrusk can actually get those points higher going forward. But the playoff prowess is important to note as well, because this team has every expectation to get into the playoffs next year, Jeff. And I think what we also saw was this management group signing guys with the playoffs in mind, which hasn't necessarily been something that previous management groups have had to deal with.
No, you're right. Really, over the last decade, this has been just about trying to, advance the cause of the hockey club, fill some gaps, championship pedigree. We know how much they overpaid for that with a player like Jay Beagle. You're right. The bar's been raised here. We know that Patrick Allvin, despite getting to the second round and taking the Oilers to 7 games, led his season-ending press conference with not being happy, wasn't pleased with the state of affairs. He wants more. And so I don't think that can be undervalued. DeBrusk played 86 playoff games, if I'm not mistaken, knocking on the door of 100 postseason games. That's a fair bit of experience that a lot of these guys here certainly don't have. And, it is kind of a funny day in as much as it's free agent day. And it does look like basically a massive trade between Vancouver and Boston. And the Bruins feel that they've addressed some of their needs, and it comes at the cost of players that are now here with the Vancouver Canucks. So, that was one of the things when I first looked at Jake DeBrusk. It was, where is he topped out in terms of his individual production per season, but also, this is a guy that's delivered in the playoffs, has had some success, has played on the big stage, and has been able to find his game and have that translate to the playoffs. So, in losing Lindholm, obviously a right shot center, penalty kill, face-off, late game, DeBrusk can give you some of those things, but he's not Elias Lindholm, different player, different, just the way that he affects a hockey club is going to be different. But in saying that, Jake DeBrusk can do some things that Elias Lindholm, didn't do for the Vancouver Canucks, certainly in the regular season, and that is bring some degree of consistent scoring. And so, I think when you commit to a guy long term, like the Canucks have done here with DeBrusk, certainly you want to see some consistency. They believe in that, or I don't think they would have been willing to go the term that they did here. And as we said earlier, he's going to get an opportunity. And I think at 5.5, goal scorers get paid. On July 1st, everybody probably gets a little more than they ought to have. But if you score goals in the National Hockey League, you're going to get yours. And so I think to get a guy that's been to 25 goals 3 times at $5.5 million, it may sound outlandish to some, but the reality of the fact is that's kind of the going rate for 25 to 30 goal scorers.
Yeah. Jeff, Nikita Zadorov got 6 years at $5 million per for Boston. Would you have done that deal?
I think in the lead up to free agency, I thought if the Canucks could get to $5 million, that was going to be enough to satisfy Zadorov. And so when Allvin told us on Friday that he was going to hit the market, I was prepared today to be absolutely blown away by some ridiculous number. I don't know how many years the Canucks were willing to go, but I have to think that they knew the stakes here, that if they wanted to keep this player, it was going to have to be sizable money and for a lot of years. So, we may never know ultimately, but I can't imagine that the Canucks offer was all that far off what the Boston Bruins were able to sign him for. Again, it would have come with inherent risks of, 29 to 34 or 35, but I do think that Nikita Zadorov would have been able to deliver, pretty decent seasons over the duration of that contract. So as much fun as he was to watch, and he was fun to watch and to deal with and all those types of things, would love to have seen the Canucks keep him around. Obviously, the two sides couldn't come to terms. I am a little surprised, though, when I finally saw the numbers in Boston, that I just have to think that the Canucks weren't that far off. So I'm not totally sure where the breakdown was between the two sides. But water under the bridge now. He has signed a long-term deal, and they'll love him in Boston. You think of that market, sure. They will absolutely love Nikita Zadorov.
Yeah, and a 6-year deal means he'll play out his age 34 season in Boston.
Yeah. I mean,
he'll need a new nickname there, though.
What's that?
He'll need a new nickname there, right? You can't.
Yeah,
right,
he's already
He's
established.
already,
he's already said.
Good
Don't
politics there from future Senator Nikita Zadorov.
Quick comment on the goaltending position with Casey DeSmith getting the contract that he did, and the Canucks were right to walk away from that and say no, thank you. Pater's just going to be an AHL goalie for the most part, break glass in case of emergency. At least we think. I mean, there's nothing more coming. This is Artur Shilov's job now as the backup. You'd have to think.
I think so. I mean, I think he put his best foot forward in the playoffs, thrown into a tough spot, and certainly thrived there. And I kind of feel like he has left the American Hockey League behind. I do think the comments of Patrick Relvin last week, and I think we may have discussed this, I wonder how much of those were, just negotiation tactics, that if he didn't want to agree, and he's an RFA, so he doesn't have leverage unless some other team swooped in here. But if they made him an offer and it was rebuffed in any way, to get his attention, maybe you just say publicly, hey, maybe we'll just shop for a veteran guy. If you don't want to, sign at our terms here, we do have some other options. So they went out to get a little bit of goaltending depth, the guy that's touched the National Hockey League and in a pinch. But no, I think it's Artur Silov's time, because, guys, they've got 2 years left on Thatcher Demko. And they need to see Thatcher Demko come back, report completely healthy, and then stay healthy. And I think a 50-32 game kind of split. I don't want to see more than Thatcher Demko. I don't need to see Thatcher Demko every night in November or February. When I need to see Thatcher Demko is every night that the Vancouver Canucks step on the ice in the playoffs. And that's something that he wasn't able to do for them this past season. So I do think that capping his games would make a ton of sense. I think Silovs is the guy. And in doing so, if you can get Artur Silovs 32 starts, you might get a better sense of whether you've got a legitimate number one in waiting at the National Hockey League level, because ultimately at this time next year, they can have a decision to make on Thatcher Demko. Do you extend him? Do you use him in the final? Goaltenders don't get traded to the trade deadline. Like, we just don't see that. Like, if there was going to be some sort of goaltending move, I think you're looking at sometime next summer with Thatcher Demko, if they decide that he's a chip to play and they've got a guy that they believe in Artur Silov. I'm not trying to run Thatcher Demko out of town, but these are the decisions that they're going to have to make a year from now.
First things first, get Artur Silov's name on a contract extension. He's an RFA. Just watching the TSN free agent frenzy this morning, they went through a goaltending exercise where Jamie McLennan said, hey, the Leafs should offer sheet Artur Silov. So we'll be looking. That
is the question across now is there an RFA trade the Canucks can make? With the remaining cap space they have, do they have assets? And I don't mean with Shilov's involved there necessarily, but is there an RFA trade to be made here for the Vancouver Canucks, of the niche-ass variety? That's not necessarily him either, but is that the one other way the Canucks can improve, either on the blue line or down the middle?
I'm just not convinced that they've got the trade chips. I know that they've got a first rounder next year. I just, you look at their development camp roster and there just isn't much flash there, because they have peddled so many picks here over the last bunch of years. And if you're in win now mode, maybe tomorrow isn't a consideration, but I don't know. I just, to get Marty Necas out of Carolina, I think the price would be significant. And I'm just not convinced that the Vancouver Canucks have the trade capital necessary to make that kind of deal.
100% with you, Jeff. About $2 to $3 million in cap space remaining, and if you're shopping in that aisle, that's the Lecker Mackey, Tom Willander, or future first
in a
round
win
pick.
now mode. Does Lekramaki for Netchess not make some?
I think you
sense?
go into next season, you see where your hockey club is.
Yep.
If it is showing you the signs that it showed you this past season, then I think you have to think longer and harder about decisions like that. Yes. But in the here and now, I suspect you'll see perhaps some tinkering here throughout the rest of the summer, and then you go full bore into October with this lineup. Jeff, you got a general manager to go cover, so we'll be listening and for Patrick Alvin's comments here today. Thank you for this. Catch up later in the week.
All right, guys. Thanks.
Hey, everybody. If you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres and Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
The kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?
Do that as well. Smash it right now.